Welcome to this talk on the latest update on associate employment status and the update made by HMRC on the 6th of September 2021. My name is Tom Slevin and I am a Chartered Accountant at Morris & Co. I have met with HMRC several times over the last few years to discuss associate dentist employment status, and I talked with them in August and September prior to their announcement. The talk today will touch on the history of associate employment status, what ESM 403 is, HMRC's latest updates and the reasoning behind the changes, and what the impact will be on the industry. So in 2006, the new NHS dental services contracts were introduced. The big change for employment status purposes was that the practice now owned the contract and associates were engaged to complete UDAs for the practice. Previously, associates brought money into the practice through their own contract with the NHS. At the time, this change was seen by some in the industry as the end of self-employment status for associates. The concern was that with practice having set contracts and activity and engaging associates on a set UDA target, monthly payments would be the same and appear to be similar to a salary. Following representations by NASDAQ at the time, HMRC updated its guidance in the Employment Status Manual, clarifying their position. ESM 4030, which relates to dentists, has a subsection for associate dentists, and it states, "It should be noted that there are standard forms of agreement for associate dentists which have been approved by the British Dental Association and the Dental Practitioners Association. These agreements relate to dentists practicing as associates in premises run by another dentist. Where these agreements are used and the terms are followed, the income of the associate dentist is assessable under trading income rules and not as employment income. In these circumstances, the dentist is liable for Class 2/4 NICs and not Class 1 NICs. The NHS General Dental Service contract, which came into force from the 1st of April 2006, provides for less fluctuation in associate dentist income. However, providing the associate dentist continues to be responsible for paying their share of laboratory fees, etc., for work relating to their patients and other terms of the standard agreement are followed, the above guidance will still apply." So I'd highlighted in red some of the important terms of the guidance to look at in more detail. So the first highlight term was, there are standard forms of agreement for associate dentists which have been approved by the BDA and the DPA. HMRC are in the process of updating all of their employment status manual, where references are made to third-party agreements or contracts. In my meetings with them, it was acknowledged that both agreements have been amended since ESM 403 was updated for the new contracts in 2006. And practices and associates can amend the clause in these contracts to their own liking. This then moves the agreement away from the standard associate agreements, and in this case, the standard agreement is not used and ESM 4030 cannot be relied upon. Many associates and practices who do not use the BDA or DPA associate agreement also automatically assume the associate self-employed due to ESM 4030 when this has never been the case. The second term we highlighted was premises run by another dentist. So since 2006, there has been a bit of a shift in the industry to corporate groups owning and running more dental practices in the UK and engaging associates to carry out work at the practice and running the practice. In these practices, the practices are not being run by a principal dentist. There is a feeling that in some of these practices, associates may also be taking on management roles that would normally be undertaken by a principal, which could have an impact on their employment status. And management responsibilities is a key question on the Check Employment Status for Tax, or the CEST tool that we'll discuss shortly, that has been released by HMRC. Again, many associates rely on ESM 403 to determine their self-employed status, despite this term not being adhered to. The last term to look at is where these agreements are used and the terms are followed, the income of the associate dentist is assessable under trading income rules and not as employment income. This is further highlighted on the guidance by stating other terms of the standard agreement are followed. One particular clause that was being looked at by HMRC was the substitution clause. So when associates are ill or they go on maternity leave or on holiday, Many contracts state it is the associate dentist's responsibility to engage a substitute or locum dentist to carry out their work. In actual working practice, most practices will find and engage the locum dentist themselves. As the terms of the contract were not being followed, ESM 4030 could not always be relied on. We did have one client who met with HMRC with ourselves present to discuss employment status, and they were asked if they had ever engaged a locum before. As they said they had never had the need to engage a locum before, they said they'd never engaged one, and HMRC wanted to know the normal working arrangement at the practice if the associate was ill or had to have time off and a locum dentist was required. Just like the management responsibilities one, the right to substitution question is a key part of the CES tool. We will go into the CES tool in a bit more detail later on. So we talked about the history behind the associate self-employment status and what ESM 403 is and what the guidance contains. So in March 2018, HMRC wrote to around 50 associates in the Northwest, and this was the start of their review into the employment status of associates. So of these 50 associates, the vast majority worked for or had previously worked for one of the larger corporates. HMRC requested a meeting with the associates to discuss their working arrangements with reference to their self-employment status. It wasn't a meeting, the meeting wasn't mandated, it was the personal choice of the associates if they wanted to meet with HMRC to discuss this. We did have some clients who did meet with HMRC and ourselves, and the contract was discussed as well as their day-to-day work and whether the arrangements actually followed the contract. Later in 2018, more associates were sent a letter from across the whole of the country asking for a meeting to discuss the employment status. We're not sure exactly how many associate dentists met with HMRC in this time, but it was only a small number of those who were sent a letter. Early 2019, we met with HMRC again. They state they were not comfortable with ESM 4030 referring to third-party contracts that they were not responsible for, and this was one of the basis of looking at the guidance. At the time, we thought it would only be a short time before they announced that ESM 4030 would be revoked, and the CES tool would need to be used by all practices and associates to determine the self-employment status. However, everything then went quiet until summer 2021. So in summer 2021, HMRC met with various groups. So this included the GDC, the BDA, the Association of Dental Groups, and NASDA. They told us they were going ahead with a review of all of their employment status manual, looking at a variety of industries and the guidance within their own manual. In particular, they were looking at industries where there was specific guidance on employment status, such as the Associate Dentist guidance. HMRC told us they would be announcing in September that ESM 4030 would be revoked from the 6th of April 2023, giving the industry 19 months to be ready. The removal of ESM 4030 will be applied prospectively, and dentists can rely on ESM 4030 for their employment status, as long as they actually adhere to the terms in the guidance until the 5th of April 2023. From the 6th of April 2023, any dentist that was relying on ESM 4030 will need to use the CES tool on the HMRC website to determine their employment status. They did state they didn't have an opinion on the employment status of dentists. We said we felt 99% of associate dentists would be considered self-employed under the CES tool. HMRC don't expect the majority of dentists to be affected by the change, but do feel some will be classed as employed by CES, especially where the agreement has the associate having less control over their work, more management responsibilities, or pay that's not linked to performance. So on the 6th of September 2021, HMRC did update their guidance and released an announcement, and they added to ESM 4030 The above guidance for associate dentists will be withdrawn with effect from 6th of April 2023, and after this date, the status of new and ongoing associate dentist engagements should be considered in line with ESM 0500 and CEST. So from April 2023, CEST will have to be used by all practices. Before that date, many practices will probably use CEST anyway if they're not adhering to ESM 4030. Many practices will want the CEST results in before that date to ensure that they're compliant with HMRC regulations. So the check employment status for tax tool CEST, it will give a judgment on the employment status of associates. Practices will need to look at the associate agreement and actual working arrangements, look if there is a difference in them and update the contract, but they will need to answer the various questions on the CEST tool to determine the employment status. They will need to answer the questions based on the actual working arrangements, but with reference to the contract. HMRC will accept the result from CEST as long as the answers given are accurate and they are accurate to the underlying contract and arrangements for the associate. At Morris & Co, we've looked at hundreds of different permutations on CEST with reference to various associate agreements we've seen. We've also looked at it based on some very strict associate agreements, which, for instance, the rights of substitution, they've got no rights of substitution. They can't engage in a locum without the express permission of the practice. They may have some management roles, and they may also have no costs, for instance, which is some of the questions on the CEST test. And some of these still do come out as self-employed. It's not as restrictive as it first was. CEST has been updated quite a few times over the last few years. And as I've said here, 99% of the time, when we've followed through all the permutations, self-employed status is confirmed by CEST according to the agreements we've seen. And even when we've not followed the agreement and looked at a really strict associate agreement which you probably wouldn't really see in practice, it still comes through as self-employed. The ones where we didn't see it come through as self-employed was where there was no costs, the associate had no substitution clauses, and they had no rights to substitution. They were paid a set amount, so they weren't paid a percentage of the fees that they generated. They had management responsibilities. All of these are unlikely to be the case for the regular associate. So as I said, associates undertaking any kind of management responsibility in practice could see a result of employment, but the vast majority of the industry does want associates to retain self-employed status. So there will be a big push over the next 18 months for practices to ensure that they're retaining their associates as self-employed. So HMRC wants all employers across all industries to use CEST, and CEST has been very controversial. There's been a lot of disagreements and arguments over it from the accounting industry, from the contractor industry as well on CEST, and they're not given a correct result. But for most associate dentists, it's a fairly straightforward tool to use. It has various questions to employment status, and there are multiple answers to some questions. So, for instance, one of the questions will ask if the practice has a say over the associate's work. But as dentistry is a very highly skilled industry, that's one of the answers on there. So some of the key topics that determine self-employment status on the CEST tool, I've already talked about the substitution clause. So whether or not the associate has the right to engage a locum dentist, and whether the practice can say no to them. But even if there is a substitution clause where the associates don't get the locum in, you can still get self-employed. How the work is paid, so it asks if they're paid a percentage of sales, percentage of profit, if they're paid a fixed fee, if they're paid a set amount per hour worked, what costs the workers has. So there's whether they have upfront equipment costs such as loops, if they have to pay for their own vehicle, if they're using the vehicle for work, if they have to pay for any other costs such as professional indemnity or any other subscription costs, DBS, stuff like that will be needed for them to carry out the work. And also makes reference to materials that need to be paid before they receive any income, which is more for the construction industry. And one that we've talked about, the management responsibilities. Again, same as the substitution clause, you can actually say that you have got management responsibilities and also still get self-employed on the test. So not every associate will have the same answer across all of the questions. But as we've said, we've looked at so many different permutations, and 99% of the time, the answer comes back as self-employed for what we consider normal working practices for an associate. So what we'll do on a further talk, we will go through the CESS tool with various different answers, and we'll see what the test result comes back with. So we'll go through 4 or 5 different permutations with working arrangements and agreements that we've seen, just to show you what the answers are, and hopefully that will then come back with the answers that you will need to do the CESS tool yourself. If you do need help with the CESS tool, you can always contact us, and we can give advice and guidance on how to use it. So that's the end of this talk on Associate Employment Status Update. As I said, a further talk will be released going through CESS and different permutations on there with different agreements that we've seen. So you can see how CESS works, what happens, how you get the results, and hopefully that will ease your mind. So thank you for listening.